Hello, and welcome to the Where People Meet podcast, the event technology podcast series for the worldwide meetings and events industry. I'm your host, Mitch Malinsky, Head of Strategic Partnerships here at PheedLoop, and today I'm joined by Janice Cardinale, one of the meetings and events industry's biggest names. Janice brings an impressive array of experiences and accolades, such as writing for the Canadian Special Events Magazine and Meeting Professionals International. She has been recognized in the industry with awards from Top 100 Entrepreneurs, Smart Meetings Magazine, Women to Watch, Powerful Women in Business, and more. Most notably, she is an entrepreneur at heart. Janice has pioneered two businesses, both of which had successful exits, and her latest project, Cardinale Creative, was born out of a desire to spotlight the importance of looking after one's mental health and to give back to the industry that she loves. We'll dive into all this and more in today's episode. Janice, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Mitch. I'm really looking forward to this conversation with you.
Absolutely. It's a very important conversation to have. So, Janice, let's start with you telling everyone a bit about yourself and your background in the meetings and events industry.
I've been an entrepreneur for 35 years. A portion of those years were spent in a completely unrelated business, but it was a business that actually ended up leading into the social events side of the industry. And within the first 5 or 6 years of the social side, I exited into corporate with a company called The Idea Hunter and, worked with that for 20 years. My daughter runs that today. And I started Cardinale Creative in January of 2021. So it's been a real interesting time to really give back to the community and help others. In many different ways. I sent students to Meeting Professionals International to become members. Those are students that competed in a competition across Ontario who were in event management and hospitality and creative design. And we chose 10 students and I funded that. I also have funded people who have had significant physical and mental issues in the industry during COVID. And today I'm creating a community called Event Minds Matter, which is all about the mental health of the event professionals that we all know who are suffering terribly after COVID.
That's incredible. A lot of initiatives you've got on the go. You're clearly a very busy lady. But what's driving all of this, Janice? Do you think the mental health of event professionals has reached a crisis?
I do. I think that one of the biggest problems with our industry is that you have a couple of things. One, you have a lot of people who during the time that they were off or let go really had to kind of dig deep and decide whether or not the industry was something that they wanted to come back into or whether or not they wanted to veer into other industries. A lot of people did take positions elsewhere. There were people also who decided to retire, who'd had enough of the industry. Mm-hmm. And of course, all of this has, led to ultimately people having a real struggle with finding people to work within their companies. It doesn't seem to matter. The Business Development Bank of Canada, they reported that 55% of businesses across Canada can't fill job positions, which is huge.
Wow.
26% of that are struggling just to retain people. So that gives you an idea. Like the numbers are very, very high.
Yep.
It's apparently in our industry here in Canada, we have 229,000 people working within the events business. So if that's, that would have brought in about approximately in 2019, $33 billion worth of business. And all of that business was lost because we're talking now about travel, we're talking about hotel business, we're talking about restaurants.
Mhm.
It was critical what happened. And again, I think the stress that came from the lack of that business and everybody completely shutting down for such a long period of time led itself into people's mental health, anxiety, depression, stress.
Yep.
How are they going to put food on their table? So that's a big deal.
It is. It really is. And it's interesting. I know you and I had a conversation before our interview today, and we were even talking about the state of mental health in the industry pre-pandemic, because even before the pandemic hit and all the stresses around that, the life of an event planner is difficult. It's very demanding. You're pulling very long hours leading up to the event. There's a lot of directions that you're being pulled in. Oftentimes, some of these teams are understaffed, so you're biting off more than what you were initially brought on for. So even before the pandemic, I think there was, as you say, a crisis around mental health in the industry. And this has just become even more spotlighted due to the stresses of the pandemic and uncertainty, pivoting to virtual, now going back on site with this new hybrid event format. It's a lot to process.
It's a lot to learn too.
Yes.
A lot of individual had to re-educate themselves. A lot of them had no idea, including myself, what these platforms were all about and how to work with them. And they came out with virtual event meeting management certificates, or you could take, protocol certificates on, to do with COVID. I mean, there were so many different things that, an event professional could do during that time. And a lot of people did do that, but there's a lot of people who didn't. And so it's very difficult. I help people with their resumes. So I know that they didn't even know what to put first, second, or third, and I just said, talk about virtual because that's what people are looking for. They want somebody with virtual, knowledge and or education. So, some people did, some people didn't, but it definitely led to, some significant changes.
For sure. And it's good to spotlight this because mental health in society, mental health in the events industry itself hasn't been talked about too much until recently. But now that we're spotlighting it, now that we're putting a focus on it, I think people are recognizing that this is really important. So, Janice, you've put a lot of focus, you put a lot of time into this. What are strategies event professionals can implement in order to balance out their mental, physical, and emotional health?
Truthfully, even before we went into the pandemic, I was seeing a lot of well-being and things at conferences that would relax oneself, like meditation, yoga, those kinds of things. And those are all still very important things. But one of the problems that event professionals have is looking after their own self-care. They'll look after a client, more so than they will look after themselves. It's almost like a badge of honor that an event professional wears, as something to say, here, this is who I am kind of thing. Yeah. But, part of the problems are that they don't have the resources or tools to figure out, how they get through these situations. And that's the employee. The employers, also don't know what to do, because when you have a team member coming to you who's completely, in stress and burnt out, you can't make them continue to work. You have to give them some time off. Mm-hmm. And, there's a lot of people also in the industry that mask, in silence. So you don't know really who's not well or who is well. It's a difficult problem. But the one thing for sure is that if you really look at event professionals, like everybody and his brother is writing about it. People are coming out on LinkedIn like never before. And, with the way that LinkedIn began as a business platform, it's become a business personal platform. Yep. People are reintroducing themselves. People are, talking about mental health, and what can we do? And that's what's led to Event Minds Matter, is to find the resources and the tools. One of the things that I myself are taking right now is something called a peer support program through Mental Health Innovations in Vancouver. It's phenomenal. And it teaches you how to deal with people and how to speak to people and the language that you use. And this should be, in my opinion, a mandatory certificate that everybody gets. The way that employers spend money on upskilling, on technology and things like that, this should also be an upskill. The price of a certificate is just over $1,000, but you get 7 sessions out of this 2 days a week for probably 6 weeks, I think it is. And it's phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. And it would be one of the first things I would tell people that they should be looking into and see whether or not they can do something with it. It's not enough to tell somebody, okay, I'm going to give you some time off, or, I'm going to pay for your meditation or your gym membership. Like, those are all important things. There's no question about it. And those are things that people have been doing for years.
Yeah.
But people need to really understand what mental health is about and what causes mental health and how you deal with mental health with your employees or your teams. And a lot of people don't do that, A lot of people, in fact, if I were to say to many people right now, do you know that there's a new law in Canada? They probably wouldn't know that.
So can you, there's a lot to unpack here. There's a few points I want to highlight that you just addressed. But before I do so, can you tell us a bit more about this new law and what it does?
We have Bill 27, which came in under royal assent on December 3rd. And what it really means, and I've done a little bit of research on this, it's called the Working for Workers Law. Okay. It creates a new obligation that employers in Ontario have to follow. It brings many changes to the Employment Standards Act, of course, which can be daunting. As an employer, you must update your contracts, workplace policies, and rules around employee protection. Removing non-compete agreements is part of this, allowing delivery drivers, for example, who deliver, furniture and decor to these locations, they have to be able to use a bathroom. So there's a lot of things that are changing here. If an employee feels that they've been overworked and that's not part of their contract, or they're working after 5 o'clock, or they're working on the weekends, they have a right to go to the labor board now and report the employer. So if these things are not in your contract, then take your contract back to your employer, because they owe you that. This is the fines for non-compliance are outrageous. So if somebody is working without a contract like this, they need to understand, they need to get that. And I'm going to assume that this is going to start to roll out in other places. I think that we started something here in Ontario, which was phenomenal, but I know that in North America, I'm sure that people are going to start to see this, and people should investigate this more, see what they could do with their, municipal governments.
So this is only in Ontario. It hasn't yet rolled out to the rest of Canada or parts in the States, correct?
I don't know about the States. I doubt it. I know because I've spoken to some friends in the US. As far as Canada is concerned, I'd have to dig a little deeper into that. I haven't had a chance really to look at the other provinces. Yep. But remember, again, this is a brand new law. It's not even 6 months old. So, it's something that, people are going to start talking about. And I think the big effect of this law is going to come when an employee says, I don't want to take your calls anymore at 6 or 7 o'clock at night. This is my time, and I have the right to disconnect. So, I don't know how much it's being used right now. We haven't heard that yet, but I certainly am going to be putting pen to paper on LinkedIn and writing a bit about this, because I don't think people understand the full gamut of what it means.
And that's the thing. I wasn't even aware of this law. I live in Toronto, Ontario, and I wasn't aware of this law until you brought it up to me. So I think that's the first step here, is educating people about it and what it means.
Yes.
Obviously, it's very important. What we saw with the pandemic and people transitioning to working from home is that you were just online. You didn't have that separate workspace of going to the office and that being where you did your work. You were just doing it when you woke up at home, and you were online all day, even past dinner. And for me, I personally found that tough because I wasn't taking the time to disconnect. I wasn't setting those boundaries. I've started doing that recently. Sunday is me day. I completely shut off, not online, not touching my laptop. And for me, coming into the office on Monday, I'm in a much better headspace. But this is very important and something that people need to be educated about.
100%.
So, beyond this law, Janice, what can the employers be doing proactively? What can work environments be doing to improve the health and well-being of their employees, which ultimately will lead to better performance for the company overall?
I remember when I was running the Idea Hunter, which was a company I had for 20 years, every Monday we would meet. At around 11 o'clock, everybody would come into the office and sit down, and we would review, the week gone by and look at everything post. So we would talk about all kinds of different things. And at that point, what would be brought up are the things that the employees felt they needed or they wanted, or, transitions, transformations, whatever the case may be. Some people felt maybe they had too much on the go, so it would be shared with somebody else. Those were the typical things that we would do. But mostly, to be honest with you, I think that now the conversation should be that, let's talk about our boundaries. Let's talk about saying no. Let's talk about the client expectation. I think a lot of problems, lie in the client expectation and then lie in the employer expectation of the employee. Because in our business, you're like working like a machine rather than a human. How fast can we get that proposal out? Because so-and-so called me Friday afternoon and wants it Monday morning. So now my entire weekend is wiped out. And that's the way that we've all been thinking, those of us who are a little bit older generation who've been in this for quite some time. This was taught to me right from the get-go. So I continue to work like that just because it's habitual. But a younger generation is definitely not going to work like that. One of the most important things right now for the younger generation is their mental health. And, one of the insurance companies was doing something on the news, and they were talking about the Gen Z. The most valuable thing in insurance for them is getting money towards mental health within their insurance plan. Not the massages, not the, the physiotherapy or whatever the other extras are. It was the mental health that they wanted to be paid, to take. So that is telling you something there too. And you're also, you're going to see a lot of people coming up, from university now or colleges and graduating who also been in isolation for 2 years with no friends around them, no support around them. And what that's caused a lot of mental health issues. I've seen students, I sit on the board at Seneca College for event management and creative design. And as the board chair, we lost a student, to mental health. Yeah, it was horrible. She couldn't complete the year. So that's just one little example, but there are so many examples of this, so many. And the people who have joined our community at Event Minds Matter are all like-minded. They're all advocates now. They all have had, their ups and downs with the stress and the burnout, and they're all coming to the table with ideas and sources that will help, speakers, materials that we can use, like all kinds of things, because we're building those pillars, of what are the most important things for an employer to think about when they're hiring somebody, when they're going to, write a contract up, and, how can they start to put more in? I mean, maybe I think remote work was one answer to that. People do want to work from home. They don't want to always work from home, but, maybe 2 days in the office, 3 days at home, and I don't think that's going to change at all. I really don't. I think that's going to continue. I think the 5 days a week, 9 to 5, depending on the industry you're in. But in our industry, you can definitely work remotely for most of it, especially as an event professional. If you're a vendor, maybe it's different. You have to come in, you have product in there in your warehouse and things like that has to go out. So it's a little bit different, just depends.
For sure. So in terms of what the actual work environments can be doing, what I've heard from you is, first off, promote a dialogue on this. Talk about mental health, talk about it with the leaders at the organization, but also talk about it with the individual employees and educate them. You need to have flexibility built into where you're working from, hours, as well as flexibility around benefits that you're providing employees. And ultimately, I think the biggest takeaway here is that sometimes you need to say no. If the timeline is too short for that project, you may just need to say no, as hard as that can be, especially for somebody like yourself, Janice, who's of that entrepreneurial mindset and trying to get as much on your plate as possible. I've learned this recently, is the importance of saying no, setting boundaries, and sticking to them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. 100%. It's the only way I think anybody in our industry is going to get through.
Yeah, agreed. So this is clearly very important. Getting mental health support is something that is being talked about more and more, and is really quite an important aspect of being a good, productive event planner for a long time in the industry. So for the audience out there, what are your recommendations on how they can get mental health support?
My first recommendation is to look at a company called Mental Health Innovations in Vancouver. There's a woman there by the name of Leslie Bennett. I will be speaking to her, not to her, but with her, at CSAE's summit this summer, July 15th.
Yep.
Just because we've now got a lot of information that we want to impart on the leaders in the, association industry. And they should look at the peer support programs. I think that every company needs a peer support program. I think it's a very human thing to do. And I think that it could bring a lot of what I'm calling now calmtainment. Mm-hmm. It's resources such as, dealing with the client with an expectation is really important, to come up with your policy around that and let your clients know well in advance. Don't call me 2 days before you need the RFP done. Yep. You need to give me time, because that's another, indicator that you're going to have a problem. There's no way you can do a request for a proposal because they're not your only client. So those are the types of things. I also think that creating a culture in where you work, maybe you want to bring in a little more greenery. Maybe you want to do one day you all have a lunch together that's, a healthy lunch of some sort. Mm-hmm. Maybe you take an evening after work and you all go somewhere, like down to the island or whatever. Start to just think about doing things that feel organic and natural and authentic, because that's what people like to do. They want to be working in an environment where it feels safe and where it feels secure and where people actually care about each other. And I noticed even in some ads now that some of the event companies are putting out there, this is a company with a strong culture of, flexibility and this, that, and the other thing. And I thought, no, that's interesting. So it's a mindset, change your mindset around this. And, I think that if people do that, they'll be much more successful.
That's great.
So, yeah.
And I believe beyond the company, there are other areas that event planners can seek out help. For instance, communities, reaching out to the event planning community as a whole and getting support there. So where can I, as an event planner, seek out and connect with some of these communities who are actively promoting a dialogue on positive mental health?
Well, you can come to Event Minds Matter and we will have a long, great talk with you. That's for sure. The other thing that people can do, I mean, there's many communities. If you look on the internet, there's one in the UK, there's several, in and around North America who have, popped up in this last year or two. But I think you have to really think about what it is that their purpose is, because a community is only good if the purpose and the value of the community is there. Our purpose is to come up with new solutions, resources, peer support programs, things like that.
Yep.
We're not going to be therapists or psychiatrists or anything like that. Okay. But we are going to listen. And I think that's another really key point, is that you have to really listen to what your employees are saying. If you're not listening, then you're not learning and you're not educating yourself. And employees often, bring things that are of interest to the company. I know within our community, like there's often articles written, there is studies and analytics done on the mental health of people in our industry. There's, speakers that you can bring in, which we're going to be doing. And actually, we're working with Meeting Professionals International on a big Talk Fest day. It's either the end of September, beginning of October. We're having our first meeting today where anybody can get online globally, because this is not just for North America, but it'll be big. It'll be very, very big. And we're working with E180 Brain Date. So we're going to really, I think, have a big crowd listening in for that and speaking. Yeah.
Wonderful. So we'll stay up to date on all of that. We'll share it on our channels as well. But Janice, this has been a really fun conversation. It's something that is incredibly important, and I'm glad we're able to spotlight it on the podcast here. So if any of our listeners want to learn more about your work, establishing a dialogue around positive mental health within their companies, or just to connect with you, what's the best way to do so?
I have an email, which is jc@cardinalecreative.com. So maybe you can flash that up at the end of this podcast so people see it.
Yep.
I mean, I have a phone number, but I think the email is much better. And people can find me on LinkedIn as well. I've written many articles on mental health. So that's another place. But I thank you, Mitch, too, because it was a great conversation. I wish I could say it was as fun as you do, but for me, it's not so fun. But it's important. That's for sure. It's important and very integral into the future of our industry.
It is. And I look forward to having more and more of these conversations going forward. Look forward to the conversation you'll be having at CSE and some of these other events you'll be doing going forward. We'll be sure to spotlight all of that and your profile and show notes. But everyone, thank you for your time. That wraps up our Where People Meet podcast episode on the state of mental health in the meetings and events industry with Janice Cardinale. Thanks for your time today, and we'll see you next time on the Where People Meet podcast.
Bye, Mitch.
Thank you, Janice.